أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته Inshallah, today we will look at some of the special teachings that we have about our houses of worship, our masajid, and how it is that we should approach them and properly honor them. There is a great deal of importance that a house of worship has for a Muslim community. And in fact, it is a blessing of Allah that He gives a community access to a masjid where they can worship, where they can pray. When that blessing has been given, then there is an obligation that comes upon us to be able to properly utilize and honor that masjid. And the acts of worship that we have been talking about, that we will be talking about, whether it be our salat, whether it be recitation of Quran, whether it be our dua, our dhikr of Allah, sujood, all of those acts of worship, they take place in masajid, they are facilitated by masajid, and it is a masjid which is where they have their greatest benefit, their greatest reward, and where that culture and that tradition can spread and can be established in our own individual lives and in our families. Masajid are mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Jinn, verse 18. Allah says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. The masajid belong exclusively to Allah. So don't call on anyone but Allah. Don't call out to, supplicate to, remember anyone but Allah. Now, this is one of those verses of the Quran that has several levels and layers of meaning. One of the layers of meaning is what we would apparently understand just from the text. That a house of worship, a masjid, it belongs exclusively to Allah. So it should not be treated in a way that might detract from the worship of Allah. And when we talk about the adab and the etiquette that we should have in a masjid, and we will see some of those aspects of how we can maintain that exclusive focus on tawheed and the exclusive focus on worship in a masjid. So on a superficial level, this verse might be talking about a house of worship. There are some ahadith that do indicate that the word masjid or masajid, when it comes in the Quran, it does refer also to the imam or to the place of the imam. Now, that is not a literal reading of the verse that would be obvious to somebody just based on the text. But it is something that has been explained in some ahadith with respect to this verse, with respect to other verses that we'll be looking at today and other verses in the Quran. And this is not something that we should consider far-fetched. Sometimes when there might be a verse which is explained in hadith as referring to the imam, people might think that this hadith or this explanation of the verse is meant to be taken literally. And then it might seem to be far-fetched, that, well, the verse, the context doesn't seem to be talking about meeting the imam in particular. But in reality, there is a logic that binds the verses of Quran together. There is a purpose for which our acts of worship, for which our places of worship have been created and have been given certain rules. And those acts of worship have been taught to us partially to bring our attention together, to unify us as a community, to put us in touch with the Prophet and with our religious leadership who are the heirs of the Prophet, so that we as individuals can function not just as individuals, but as a community, as a group, with the proper links that need to be in place and with the proper hierarchy that needs to be in place. And so our prayer, salat, can be a salat when I pray alone and when you pray alone. But it is proper and it is in its best form when it is done in jama'ah. And that jama'ah, even if the imam of the jama'ah is not the imam, but it symbolizes for us coming together and respecting the leadership that Islam has taught us and the basis for the leadership that Islam has taught us. That is why it is important for us to give importance to the character of our jama'at and who it is who is leading the congregation. Hajj, the same thing. Masajid are also places of gathering for worship. It is possible for a person to worship anywhere in the earth or at home, in private. But when we gather together to worship in the masjid, then a major benefit of that gathering together is for us to gain knowledge of our imam, to gain knowledge of how it is that we are to join hands to work to further our Islamic values and to fulfill our religious obligations as a collective, as a group. And that is only possible if there is a recognition of the imam. So it's not far-fetched. The purpose for which we have masajid and the purpose for which we have the acts of worship that we do in masajid, they come together and they derive their meaning through the imam. So when we speak of these verses of Quran, in some cases, our imams have said that be aware that the batn or the inner meaning of these verses, the esoteric meaning of these verses, it refers to the imam. And that isn't far-fetched because that is what gives us a reminder and a better understanding of the purpose for which we have these acts of worship, for which we have these broader institutions within Islam. So one layer of meaning of this verse, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا, is of course the masjid itself as a physical structure, a place. Another layer of meaning is that it refers to the imam or the wasi. A third layer of meaning is that it refers to those parts of our body that are especially associated with our salat because they have an obligation in sujood. This is a hadith from our first Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. He says that يَعْنِي بِالْمَسَاجِدِ الْوَجْهِ وَالْيَدَيْنِ وَالرُّكْبَتَيْنِ وَالْإِبْهَامَيْنِ. Now, the face and the two hands, specifically the palms of the two hands, and the two knees, and the two toes, or the two big toes of the feet. Now, if you are looking at these parts of the body, you know that these are the 7 parts of the body that it is required to do sajda on. They are literally the places of sajda, and that is what the word masjid means. It is ismul makan in Arabic, a place of sujood. So the places of sajda in terms of our body are these 7 parts of our body. When we go into prostration, we must put our forehead on the ground. We must put the hands, and specifically the palms of the hands, on the ground, not just the fingers. Our knees must be on the ground, and the 2 toes of our feet, they must be also on the ground. And there is a meaning of this verse that has been extracted by the Imams also, just as a note, that corrects a mistake that was made by some of the caliphs in early Islamic history and that has found its way into the law as practiced by some schools of thought within Islam. It is known, and it is a verse of the Quran, that the punishment for certain types of theft is to have the hand cut off. But there is a disagreement among different schools of law as to what that hand means. Because the word yad in Arabic can be used to refer to the hand as we know it in English. It can be used to refer to the forearm. This can also be called the yad. And it can be used to refer to the entire arm. That is also called yad in Arabic. So when the Quran says that you should cut off the hand of a thief with those conditions that are found in ahadith and within Islamic law, there was a disagreement as to where that cutting should take place. And the Imam said that the Quran says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ. So those parts which are to be put on the ground in sujood, they should not be cut when this punishment is being done. And so the most lenient form of that punishment, in fact, if you look at the different schools of thought within Islamic law, is in the Shi'i school of law, which is based on the teachings of the Imam. And so the Imam said that, yes, the Quran says hand, but it doesn't mean the entire hand in one of those broader meanings. The palm is lillah. It belongs to God. It should be preserved so a person can perform their prayer and their other daily activities properly, and only the 4 fingers are to be cut off for those who are deserving of that punishment. So that is a note, but it gives us a reminder of how a single verse of Quran can have different layers of meaning. The place of sujood can refer to the sanctity of a masjid, it can refer to the sanctity of our relationship to the Imam, and it can simultaneously refer to the importance and the sanctity of those parts of our body which are to participate and to have a role in performing our salat and our prayer properly. There is another verse of Quran in Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 31. We have the instruction given to us, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya Bani Adam, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. This verse, it is translated as, O descendants of Adam, take your adornment at every masjid, at every time of prayer or every place of prayer, and eat and drink, but don't exceed the limits, don't be wasteful. Allah does not love those who are wasteful. Now, here again we find the mention of masajid, and that it is recommended for a person to adorn oneself for every masjid. And here there is that dual meaning that can apply as well. One explanation that has been given in ahadith is that it refers specifically to Jum'ah and Eid prayers, the 2 Eids. That a person should do ghusl before going to the prayer for Jum'ah, do ghusl before going to the prayer for Eid, Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha, and that a person should wear clean white clothes, preferably the best color to wear on a day of Eid, which includes Friday and which includes the day of Eid, is the color white. So that is one level of meaning for this verse, that we should take special care to give importance to Fridays and give importance to Eid by dressing well. There is another level of meaning, though, where our Imams extended this verse not just to the masjid where we might go for Jum'ah or we might go for Eid, but also to every prayer, because every prayer has sajda in it, and therefore it is a time and a place for prostration that is part of every prayer. So for example, there is a hadith of our 8th Imam, Imam Ali Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. He says that it means to prepare yourself for every salat. مِنْ ذَلِكَ التَّمَشُّطُ لِكُلِّ صَلَاةٍ. That part of that is to comb your hair and to look after your appearance for every prayer. It is reported that when Imam Hasan Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam used to stand for prayer, كَانَ إِذَا قَامَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ لَبِسَ أَجْوَدَ ثِيَابِهِ. That he would wear his best clothing, whatever clothing he had, he would choose the best of it for prayer. That's the opposite of what many of us do, because we think that we have to go into ruku', we have to go into sujood, that's going to stretch the knees on our nice pants. And so we might think that for prayer we should have some other clothes that are not as sensitive and not as important. Imam Ali would wear his, Imam Hasan alayhi salam, and our other Imams as well, they were conspicuous for wearing their best clothes in the time of salat. And so that was something which people noticed. It was the general practice of our imams. But in the time of Imam Hasan, people noticed that he would change into his best clothes. They said, "Why is it that you do that?" And the imam would reply that, "Inna Allaha jameel yuhibbul jamal, fa'atajammalu li Rabbi." And then he recited this verse, that Allah is beautiful, and He loves beauty. So when I am going to meet my Lord, I want to go in the form and in the manner that is most pleasing to Him. That's something that all of us, we do intrinsically. If I start a new job and I find out that their requirement or their expectation is that I dress a little bit more formally than I am used to dressing or than I am comfortable, if I want that job and if I value that job, I will immediately go and find what is in my wardrobe that fits how I should dress at that job. And if we don't have those things, then we will procure those types of apparel which will be appropriate for that environment. If we are going to meet somebody and we value that person, then we will dress in a way that they find appealing or that they find respectful. When we go to meet Allah, we should also give importance to that meeting. Allah is going to be looking at us with special favor. And Imam Hasan said that to know how to do that, Inna Allaha jameel, yuhibbul jamal. So, tajammal li rabbik. Then make yourself jameel, make yourself look good for your Lord. Now, masajid are places of worship. They are places that have a special etiquette. There is a tendency in every religion to become kind of attached to our own houses of worship and to become possessive. So the verse that I recited, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ, that reminds us that yes, I may have been one of the founding members of a particular community that was able to build a masjid. I might have been one of the donors that was able to contribute funds or raise funds or get the ball rolling or do whatever it might have been to get that masjid built. And that is a favor that Allah bestows on certain members of His creation. Not everybody has the tawfiq and the blessings to be able to participate in this divine goal. But if I have played a role and Allah has showed me that favor, the masjid is not my masjid. The masjid belongs to Allah. He showed me a favor by letting me take part. I don't have any particular ownership over that masjid. And we shouldn't get possessive about our masajid as well, especially as Muslims. We don't have that tradition in Islam to consider masjids to belong to a particular sectarian identity, unlike what you find in many other religions. And we shouldn't feel any kind of aversion, at least as followers of Ahlul Bayt, to go and to participate in the prayers of other masajid. The person came to Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He said, "Inni akrahu as-salata fi masajidihim." I don't really like to go and perform salat in their masajid. Right? There meaning the other schools of thought that existed in Kufa or in the Islamic world who were not followers of Ahlul Bayt. And it might not have been just empty prejudice. Maybe the masjid has a name that is not a name that sits well with somebody who is a follower of Ahlul Bayt. Maybe some of the sermons might contain a message which is not exactly in accordance with the proper understanding of Islam. Maybe the prayer itself is not going to be performed perfectly. But the Imam said, "La takrah." Don't dislike it. Perform your wajib prayers. And even go there for your nawafil. And if you have qada prayers that you need to make up that have been missed, then make up those prayers in that masjid as well. And so what the Imam is saying is, don't just go there as a superficial show of unity. That, well, I'm going to go in the Fajr prayer and show them that we pray Fajr as well. No, that is a masjid. So treat it as you will treat a masjid. If it were a masjid that you honored and that you respected, you would go for the jama'at, for the faridah, but you would also go to do your nawafil. You would also go to make up your prayers. So do that. There is another hadith where a person said to the sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Now this is probably in a situation where the city was largely not a Shi'i city and where there may not have been a masjid that was frequented by followers of Ahlul Bayt, where there was a jama'at that was done in accordance with Ahlul Bayt. So presumably in that context, a person came to the Imam and said, we have two choices. we have the possibility that إِنَّ رَجُلًا يُصَلِّي بِنَا نَقْتَدِي بِهِ فَهُوَ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْكَ أَوْ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ. That we have somebody who can lead a prayer, and this person is qualified to be an imam. They are adil, they do the imam according to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, the correct salat. So do you prefer for us to follow this jama'at, to do it, but in a basement, or in one of our own homes, or maybe outside somewhere? أو في المسجد. Or should we go to the masjid? And the assumption, of course, then, is that the masjid will not have those conditions. And the imam replied, بَلِ الْمَسْجِدُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ. To pray in the masjid is more pleasing to me, because the masjid has its own blessing and its own reward, and there are many benefits that come to the community also when we make use of masajid, and we consider all of the masajid of the Muslim ummah to be masajid that belong to every member of that ummah. There is an exception, which is Masjid al-Dirar, a masjid that is built specifically to create schism and disunity in the community. That doesn't mean a new masjid is built, and we say, why did they build a new masjid that is closer to them and maybe more convenient for them? But it does refer to a masjid that is built specifically in order to divide the Muslim ummah. I think probably the best example that we have in our time is these masajid that are built by takfiri groups that call other Muslims kafir, that spread a message of aversion to other Muslims, of violence. That type of a masjid, wherever it might be, that is a masjid where we don't give it the respect because the intention and the utilization is not in accordance with what it should be. However, a masjid should be something that we utilize. There are many ahadith that there will be three things that will complain to Allah on the Day of Judgment. Alimun bayna juhal, a scholar among ignorant people who don't make use of that scholar, or who make use of the scholar for things which are not actually in proper keeping with the knowledge that that scholar might have. And when we speak of scholars, some ahadith speak in general, and it might refer to any senior scholar or ulama or fuqaha who might not be properly appreciated by the community. But there are other ahadith that speak specifically of the itra of the Prophet, that it is not just all ulama bayna juhal, but specifically and especially the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, who were ulama, and they were among people who did not properly utilize them. So one, of course, is a scholar, or in particular the imam, the mushaf, a Quran that is somewhere on a bookshelf, forgotten about, collecting dust, that will complain on the Day of Judgment. Right? People sometimes say that we want to have a Quran in our house for blessings and barakah. It does bring blessings and it does bring barakah. But we don't want those same books to come on the Day of Judgment and say to Allah that I was on the bookshelf from one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, and nobody picked me up once except perhaps to dust me off. And then finally, وَمَسْجِدٌ خَرَابٌ لَا يُصَلَّى فِيهِ, a masjid that has been abandoned and that people do not pray in. So it is an act of worship to take a masjid that is being underutilized or that is not being utilized and to try to utilize it properly. To pray in a masjid is something that is recommended for both men and women. But for women in particular, there is also, it is mustahab to pray in a masjid, for especially the fara'id, and that istihbab, according to our fuqaha, it applies equally to men and to women. But there are some ahadith that also speak of the greater recommendation for a woman is to pray in a place that has the greater concealment from being exposed to a non-mahram glance. And so some of our fuqaha, they have combined it. They have said that this means that the masjid is mustahab for a man and for a woman. But if a woman feels that she is better able to have her hijab at home, then that prayer at home will have more reward and more thawab. So, تُسْتَحَبُّ لِلْمَرْأَةِ الصَّلَاةِ فِي الْمَكَانِ الْأَسْتَرِ, a place that has that greatest ability to maintain Islamic modesty. But as a general ruling, to pray in a masjid is mustahab for men, it is mustahab for women, and especially in our society, when it is really only in the masjids that we have the ability to get together, to benefit from one another, to find out how other members of our community are doing, to learn, and also to serve as good role models for others. That recommendation will be more important and more emphatic for both men and for women to participate regularly in the masajid. There are many, many ahadith that speak of the reward of visiting masajid. As our imams have said in ahadith, إِنَّمَا أُمِرَ بِتَعْظِيمِ الْمَسَاجِدِ لِأَنَّهَا بُيُوتُ اللَّهِ فِي الْأَرْضِ. That the masajid, they are God's houses in this earth. And so you honor the house of God, just like any place that is associated with Allah deserves to be given a special respect. There is a hadith that says that one of the benefits of having a masjid that people go and pray in is that even those who might not be actually participating in the prayers in the masjid, they might not be regular masjid goers, they benefit and they might be saved from at least some worldly punishment because of that institution existing within their midst. It's a very beautiful hadith, and it does a little bit of correction to the mistake that sometimes Muslims might even make, thinking that it is the superficial, prominent people in society who get all the credit. On a spiritual level, sometimes those who are weak, those who are vulnerable, they are in a higher position than those who may have social influence and position. This hadith, for example, it says that إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى لَيُرِيدُ عَذَابَ أَهْلِ الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا حَتَّى لَا يُحَاشِيَ مِنْهُمْ أَحَدًا. There are some times when Allah decrees that He is going to punish the people of the earth without making an exception for anybody because of their evil, because of sinfulness, because, for example, if we are in a society that has done an injustice and we have not taken a sufficient stance against that injustice, even if we are not the criminals, we are still worthy of punishment. And so there are times when Allah has decreed that this society is worthy of punishment. However, then فَإِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَى الشِّيبِ نَاقِلِي أَقْدَامِهِمْ إِلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ يَتَعَلَّمُونَ الْقُرْآنَ رَحِمَهُمْ فَأَخَّرَ ذَلِكَ عَنْهُمْ. Then Allah looks and gives a special attention to the old men and old women who are with difficulty taking those steps towards the masjid. Shouldn't be only old men and old women who come to the masjid, but in many cases they are the most regular and frequent participants. And the young children who are in the masajid learning the Quran. And Allah says that no, when there is a masjid where there are elderly people who are coming to pray, where there are young children learning the Quran, even if that city is worthy of punishment, I will postpone that punishment and I won't do so. So it reminds us that sometimes those people who do not get sufficient credit in society, they might be the ones that are protecting you and me and our general Muslim community from coming to terms or coming face to face with the punishment that we might have earned. We should give a special respect to them, facilitate their worship, and give them the honor that they are due, but also remember that it is because of the masajid that those blessings come to a community. There are rewards also that are mentioned for specific things within the masjid. One thing is to clean the masjid. One thing is to contribute to the upkeep and the maintenance of the masjid in the time of the Prophet and the Imams. That would often be by people coming and giving lanterns or candles that could be used in the masjid for light and illumination in night prayers. In our time, of course, that would be contributing to the operating expenses of the masjid to make sure that it can continue to function and serve the community in the best possible way. So there are many rewards that are mentioned for these important services. Let us look briefly at some of the etiquette of masajid, and I will do this because we are limited in time as quickly as possible. The ahadith of Ahlul Bayt indicate that the importance of a masjid is, of course, for remembrance of Allah. The Prophet said in a hadith that إِنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ إِنَّمَا نُصِبَتْ لِلْقُرْآنِ. They were only established for the Quran, which includes, of course, the recitation of Quran in salat. So it is recommended not to engage in worldly discussions in the masjid, not to raise one's voice, not to buy, not to sell, not to recite poetry, except if it be for a religious purpose, but not to talk about worldly affairs. There is a hadith, نَهَى النَّبِي أَنْ رَطَانَةِ الْأَعَاجِمِ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, that sometimes people might talk, and if we are in a country, for example, where everyone speaks English, and we have a very active conversation going on in some language that nobody else understands, well, that is distracting, and it might also be something which can create bad blood and some kind of uneasiness among people of the masajid, so that is something that should be avoided. There are ahadith that the Prophet would avoid going to the masjid if he had just eaten any food which might have an odor that would be offensive to others. And the Prophet himself used to avoid eating onions and used to avoid eating garlic for that reason, because he would go frequently to the masjid. So it's recommended to maintain that and to use طيب or to use perfume when we go to the masjid. There is a verse of Quran in Surah Tawbah, verse number 18. We read that إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَى الزَّكَاةَ وَلَمْ يَخْشَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ فَعَسَىٰ أُولَٰئِكَ أَنْ يَكُونُوا مِنَ الْمُهْتَدِينَ. That the only people who are given the ability by Allah to يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ, to make the masajid flourish, they are people who have a special blessing from Allah, those who have true iman in God and in the last day. And these are the people who will achieve guidance. Abu Dhar in one hadith asked the Prophet, how is it that we can do imaratul masajid? How can we make these masajid flourish? What does that mean? It means, of course, building, constructing, establishing, contributing to a masjid. But the Prophet said specifically that you should not raise your voice, you should not speak about anything in the masjid which is not of a religious significance. You should abandon any kind of vain talk or any kind of talk that doesn't have a benefit. Buying and selling and these types of things should also be avoided in a masjid. Then there is an etiquette when we enter into the masjid. It is recommended to enter into the masjid with our right foot first, to leave the masjid with our left foot first, and to recite salawat on the Prophet and his progeny when we enter and when we leave the masjid. There is a hadith of Lady Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha that it was the practice of the Prophet himself even to recite salawat on himself, because it has thawab and it has reward. And the form that he would do that in is he would say, Allahumma ghfir li dhunubi waftah li abwaba rahmatik, when he entered into the masjid, and Allahumma ghfir li dhunubi waftah li abwaba fadlik, when he would leave the masjid. So reciting salawat, entering and leaving the masjid, is something which is very highly recommended. And then just to conclude, when we enter a masjid, it is very highly recommended to do tahiyyatul masjid, to greet the masjid. And that is by reciting a 2 rak'at prayer, with the niyat, or the intention, that it is to greet the masjid. Now if you are entering the masjid to do a nafilah, that's fine. Or if you're entering the masjid to do a wajib prayer, like maghrib, that's fine. But if you're entering the masjid, there's still time until the prayer, then as soon as you enter the masjid premises, you can make the intention of a 2 rak'at prayer with the intention of tahiyyatul masjid. And it is recommended to keep children away from the masjid if they might make the masjid najis, or if they might disturb other people who are worshipping in the masjid. Fuqaha have mentioned, though, that if you can maintain those 2 considerations, then of course it is good to bring children in the masjid so they can benefit and become familiar with the masjid. But it has to be done in a way that isn't something that would distract others. With that, we will conclude, and it is time for Salatul Maghrib. Please recite salawat.